Foxhole has a problem, and that problem is player retention. We can see from this player numbers graph that there was an explosion when the game fully released in September, but since then the player numbers have returned to pre-update levels, albeit with a spike when the new Caboose update dropped. Of course, you wouldn't expect all new players to stick around, but if you take this graph at face value, it appears none of them did. Or did they? Something tells me there's more than meets the eye here, so in this video we're going to analyse the possible causes of this phenomenon and, more importantly, explore potential solutions for our beloved Foxhole. A quick disclaimer for those of you who don't normally follow my content: I like to analyse things as objectively as I can. This certainly is not Foxhole bashing saying the game is dead. Far from it. I love the game and I think it has a great future. As with previous videos, I'm prompting a mature discussion about potential causes of a situation and potential solutions, because we all know that collective brainpower and YouTube comments can solve anything. Also, I love sarcasm, but let's move on swiftly. Let's start by looking at this graph in more detail. If we track way back into the depths of time to 2017, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and for all we knew, COVID could have just been the name of an Ewok standing in the background of Darth Vader's cremation ceremony. But in 2017, Foxhole was released. And let's be honest, we can see how far it's come in that time. So in the grand scheme of things, the game is performing well. But we can't just ignore this big decrease in player numbers since the game's full release in September. I'm always a fan of taking the path of least resistance. So can we explain this quickly and easily so we can go down the pub and have a pint? Some players are of the opinion that this player numbers trend is entirely normal, expected, and nothing to fuss about. Maybe they have a point there, maybe there isn't an issue at all. But it does seem reasonable to expect at least some of those newfound players to stick around, so that when the spike in numbers inevitably does come down, it still hovers somewhere above pre-update levels. So is this normal? Well, let's compare the player numbers to another very similar game, Hell Let Loose, which saw its own full release back in July 2021. What happened to the player numbers there, and how does that compare with Foxhole? You can see the numbers hovering around 5,000 to 6,000 pre-full release, then a big spike up to 14,000, but look at what happens after. The numbers do reduce over the following weeks almost to pre-release levels, and then they go back up to around 8,000, and the game goes from strength to strength from there. There are always issues comparing different games, but you could argue that this is a good example of a successful release. A spike in numbers, a predictable tailing off, but ultimately they are stronger after the release than they were before. Perhaps due to the influx of newer players who don't know what they're doing, more experienced players take some time out, wait for the influx to pass, then come back. A bit like the New Year's resolution people in the gym for the first 2 weeks of January. I don't know about you, but I'm not convinced. Using Hell Let Loose as a comparable benchmark, the dip in Foxhole player numbers after release is just too much. It's increased a bit since then, but that's due to another new update, so I think there's more going on here. So what else might have affected the player numbers in such a way? It's entirely possible that after the initial hype of the full release and new features, that the community in general actually wasn't that impressed with the changes once they'd had a chance to get to know them. So what changes were made? Don't worry, I'm not going to perform a line-by-line analysis, but here are the headline changes. Facilities were introduced for logistics players, including power grids, pipelines, and mining operations. Trains, including railway guns, were a brand new addition, mostly again for logistics players. Fire was introduced in a big way. Flame tanks and flamethrowers. Yes, I really am just reading the highlighted release notes on Steam here. Rocket artillery. Happy days. Battle tanks and heavy tanks, they're just massive. I mean, look at them. They're awesomely ridiculous. These new additions are all well and good, but are they fun? Fire and tanks are always welcome, but facilities and trains in particular are complex additions to an already complex logistics system. In fact, one of the biggest issues I'm seeing highlighted by players is that logistics and building are simply too complex or more time-consuming, boring, and they feel like a second job. Now, this one is really tricky for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I'd hate to suggest that something is too complicated simply because it takes a new player a while to learn it. And second, I would equally hate to suggest that complex systems are bad and they should all be made easy. I'm not saying either of those things, and I can already hear people screaming at me that there are no problems here, there's meant to be a grind, what's the fuss about? But here's the thing. To take advantage of everything that Foxhole has to offer in facilities and in trains, it feels increasingly like you need to be in a clan to make the most of those features. That puts off new players. And even then, the job satisfaction for those who do have access to those incredibly important tasks just isn't there. It's mad to be talking about job satisfaction in a game, but it really does feel like a second job. It may just take time for trains and facilities to bed in, but it seems more experienced players logged on for the Inferno update to see if the logistics and building systems were improved, and for many it seems the answer was no, resulting in the player dip that we've seen. Something I can say, and this is personal opinion time as a casual player, before the Inferno release, I felt there was a chance I could get involved in more complex logistics, but now it seems like a mountain to climb. Another simple explanation is that all of the new players just left. Everyone who played before is still there, and nothing has really changed. I think you'll agree that's a bit too simplistic. Taking a break is normal for this game due to burnout, but you need those players to come back. In particular, I've heard that Warden players are taking a break from the game. A complete rumour, but it raises another important point. Not only does a game like Foxhole require a certain number of players to remain viable, you need enough players on both sides of the war for it to work. Although the game does have some controls in place to encourage balanced teams, an imbalance of players wanting to play on a certain side will inevitably cause issues. So yes, it does seem most of those new players came and went in a week or so. However, I suspect some of them did stick around, but that's been offset by other more experienced players deciding they'd had enough. Following on from that logic, there is of course always the argument that changes to core parts of the game are attracting a new type of player entirely. Out with the old and in with the new. It's certainly a high-risk maneuver to change a game such that it results in veterans leaving and hoping that entirely new players come in, but that might be what's happening here, and it might be that it works. Or it won't. For example, you could argue that the new logistics system that came with the 1.0 release of the game appeals more to Factorio players who simply hadn't heard of Foxhole a year ago. Maybe it doesn't matter that current players don't like the new systems, as long as new players from different games fill their shoes. Perhaps this will happen over a longer period of time, months or even years, but I can't see it explaining the player numbers we've seen since Inferno was released. An interesting thought, nonetheless. But, my friends, there is hope, in the form of a big caboose. Yes, the new Caboose update has landed, and it's produced an interesting new spike in players. So let's analyse this new update, the new features that it brings, and most importantly, do they address the issues that we've raised? First up, we have fire engines. Makes sense, given the previous update brought fire to the game. Then there's the Caboose itself, to help maintain train tracks more easily, a welcome upgrade for sure. There are facility upgrades, probably making your life easier, albeit even more to learn. Flamethrowers have been buffed, can't argue with that. A few new vehicles and weapons, standard stuff. Some quality of life improvements, mostly centered around building. Actually, I think the Caboose update has made a difference, but has it done enough? It's a bit early to tell. If you aren't a fan of facilities, your opinion probably hasn't changed, but I hope to hear from some builders about those quality of life improvements and whether they address the core issues they have with building. So, our beloved Foxhole, what can be done to improve the current situation? As I said at the beginning of this video, I personally love the game and probably always will, but it's okay to say when things aren't quite working and discuss potential improvements. I'll start things off here, but I'm mainly a frontline run, stabby kind of guy, so I'd appreciate input in the comments from builders, logistic players, and basically everyone who cares enough to contribute. A new, fresh and detailed tutorial would go a long way to improving player retention. Foxhole is a complex game, and I've found more experienced players are very generous with their time explaining how the systems work, but even so, a steep learning curve can be frustrating not just for the new player, but for the more experienced players playing alongside them while they learn. Now, I'm all for everyone helping each other out, but you have to admit, an effective tutorial really helps to smooth things over. Foxhole could use an update in this area, and I'm sure it will have a positive effect on player retention. Next, I'm going to suggest a renewed focus on quality of life changes. It's still early days, but it seems the latest Caboose update did provide a fair few positive changes. But let's be honest, a lot more could be done with the interface, for example, to just make things more straightforward for new players and old. If anything, the main point here is to perhaps put new content on hold while focusing on what we already have and making it work to its full potential. In particular, the interface and controls are fine once you've played the game for a while, but for new players, they're clunky as hell and could do with streamlining. They just could. Adding some tools into the game so you can more easily create or join a squad of people around you on the fly would be a welcome addition to the game. It's technically possible at the moment, but creating tools so it's easier for a player to create, invite, and manage a squad of random people around them for that one play session would be an amazing compromise between solo and clan play. You may end up working with 10 other players for 2 hours and never see them again, but for those 2 hours the game gave you the intuitive ways to gather up those 10 players, organize them, and communicate with them in more effective and meaningful ways than are available to us at the moment. Now, I know the easy answer is that you can just go onto Discord and join a regiment, but I genuinely believe there is room for improvement here, especially to help casual players cooperate on the fly with no onward commitment required. Something that was always going to be tricky was the number of shards when there's a big spike in players. All of those new players couldn't fit onto one shard, but now most of them are gone. We now have the player base split across 3 shards. Actually, I think Baker got folded, but we still have 2. I'd be really interested to know how much work it would require to increase how many players can be on one shard. One slightly bigger shard that means when there is a modest spike in players, they can all play on the same shard still. Or, alternatively, there should always be a second, much smaller shard that's a place for learning, experimenting, and basically more casual play. The map itself could be a lot smaller with far fewer hexes than the main shard and only support a much lower number of players so as not to split the player base too much. Just a thought. As much as it goes against my nature to suggest this next one, I think building and logistics just need to be a bit less grindy. There must be a grind, of course, otherwise everyone will just have the latest equipment, but the grind versus reward balance needs to be addressed. The fun needs to be injected back into these sections of the game. Foxhole is a game, after all. The grind is an important part of the game, it needs to be there, but finding ways to make it more fun would go a long way to improving player retention. Perhaps a mini-game while you're harvesting or building to make it more engaging. As much as I try to keep this kind of analysis factual and unbiased, clearly there are points at which opinion creeps in. Realistically, I can't help that, but I do try. You'll just have to allow for some of that so I can actually get to the end of this video. I'd like to confirm that this isn't one of those Foxhole is dying videos, because it isn't, far from it, but it does have an issue, and that's okay. Players still care enough to want to solve them, and that's what really matters here. I fully accept that even hinting that there is an issue with our beloved game will upset some players, and I'm happy to take that on the chin if it means getting a constructive discussion going, which is ultimately my aim. Trying to attract new players while keeping old players happy, it's not easy. There's always going to be churn, but this game deserves more success. It's worth fighting for. It's worth having these debates, because we all know how much this game has to give. It's just feeling a bit like it's taking too much from us at the moment. Thanks for sticking around this far. Leave us a like if you enjoyed the video, and I look forward to hearing from you in the comments below. See ya.